everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for our January artwork talk. My name is Molly Cronin. I'm a BA 2015, and I'll be your host today. And to begin, our alumni community is far-reaching. We have members across the globe, but our meeting today is taking place in Chubuktuk in Mi'kmaq in the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. We are honored to work, gather, and make art here. And I'm joined today by two artists with Carley Mullally, BFA 2015. Is that right, Carley? Thank you. Okay, same year. And by Jennifer Green, BFA 2009. And we're here today to talk about sustainability in textile practices and specifically about Carley and Jen's work. So if you guys feel comfortable kind of maybe getting us started by telling us a little bit about your art practices, I'd love for us to just dive right into it. Maybe Carley, you could get us started.
Sure. Yeah, I'm Carley. I'm a textile artist. I technically am a weaver. I do a little bit of everything except weaving right now, I feel, but it tends to underpin most of my practice right now. And I work a lot with found materials, a lot of found fishing debris right now, and trying to transform it into and provide it a new life and a new use, and trying to get other people on board in collecting and working with these materials as well. I live in the South Shore right now. I'm originally from Pictou County in northern Nova Scotia, and I'm actually in Chubuktuk right now in Halifax working on a show.
Nice, thanks, Carley. Jen, could you tell us a little bit about your art practice?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Jennifer Green. I go by Jenny usually. And I guess I would say I've kind of woven in and out of different areas of textiles, but weaving, similar to Carley, I would say weaving is one of my primary kind of methods that I approach textiles with. Hand spinning is also something that's pretty significant. And I'm pretty passionate about linen and flax and the kind of development of a local flax industry here. So I'm sure we'll get into all the fun, sustainable aspects of that project as well.
Thanks, Jenny. Yeah, we're going to get all into flax, all into everything, all into our sustainable practices. But I'd love to pull it back for a second and talk about your time, both of you, at Nascad a little bit. What were you studying at Nascad, and how did your time at Nascad impact your current practices? Jenny, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, sure. So I came to Nascad from studying architecture for 2 years. And when I decided to go to Nascad, I was really sure and really passionate that I wanted to study weaving. And I kind of dove right in. And I think one of the main philosophies that underpinned the textile department at the time, and this was kind of across weave and dye and print, was this real, almost like purist approach to the material and the importance of the material. I see Robin here. Thanks for joining, Robin. Robin was one of my teachers when I was a student. But I think it really instilled in me this approach to my creative practice that I could always go back to the material. I could always start with the material, listen to the material, see how it's fun, see how I want to respond to the material as a weaver. And I think as I developed and advanced during my time at Nascad, my professors really encouraged me to go kind of deeper into the material. So, as I was becoming really passionate about weaving linen, there was always this emphasis to go deeper. Like, okay, now that if you want to be a better weaver, you should learn how to spin. And so then learning how to spin linen was a big part of my practice. And once I learned how to spin, it was like, okay, go deeper, like now learn how to grow the plant. So I think that philosophy of this almost reverence for the material is something that really impacted me at the time and stayed with me. But I think, Nascad was also just a place where I could find that passion, really go into it, and then imagine, that I could spend a career, investing in that. So yeah, I think those were the main impacts for me.
That's great. I like the term reverence a lot.
Yeah.
Carly, what about you?
Well, I started at Nascad. Yeah, it was my first time living in the big city, going to Nascad. So again, I was from northern Nova Scotia, and I was always surrounded by creative people. And I grew up in the 4-H program. I grew up with a family of knitters and sewers and quilters. So I was always surrounded by that, but I didn't realize that was art really until I got to Nascad. And I figured I was going to do fashion because when I knew I liked working with fabrics and things, I thought that was the only route that you could take. I never knew about textile artists until probably second, third year of my time at Nascad. But the foundation year that I took was very transformative. Like I vividly remember taking a intro to visual culture class, and our instructor showed us John Waters films, and I was like, this is art, this is insane, this is crazy, this is wild, and it was fun. And so I was being exposed to all this new language and different ways of working. So when we kind of started to figure out what our major wanted to be or what classes we were taking, I again thought I was doing fashion, signed up for all fashion classes, but we needed to take textiles classes alongside as well. And I remember taking the weaving class with Leslie Armstrong, and just again having so much fun. And it was collaborative, it was experimental, it was wacky. You were allowed to make mistakes, and you were encouraged to really have a playful attitude. And instructors like Nancy Price and Sandra Brownlee, Toshiko, it was like this big community of a really fun way of working that I found myself being drawn into more and more. So I kind of separated from fashion and found myself working again and being really inspired by the materials we were using, and being encouraged to work in unconventional ways as well was what I really found exciting at my time, or of my time at Nascad.
Yeah, I want to bring it to the materials for a second. You both work in materials that I think are very tied to like both contemporary and historic labor practices in Nova Scotia. Carly, with your use of found materials like lobster bands from the fishing industry, and Jenny with your attention to flax production and spinning. So I'd love to talk a bit about these industries, about the fashion textile industry and about the fishing industry a little bit, and what ways your art practices maybe kind of talk about those industries and about the environmental impacts of those industries, if I may. Maybe Carly, you could get us started there.
Sure. I always feel like I'm walking on a tightrope whenever I start talking about industry in this way too. Because I think when you're raised in Nova Scotia, you're a stone's throw away from a fisherman at any time. Or you're like, I have a lot of fishermen in my family, so I always have to kind of be careful when I'm speaking critically. But I think the same can be said about all industries. It's about money. It's about increasing efficiency and focusing on that side of things. And then the environmental impact is normally saved until it's too late to address. I was looking at numbers the other day of the amount. I think we harvest like 173 million tons of fish a year globally. And that's both farm and wild fishing. And so thinking about that amount of fish and the equipment that goes into catching those fish, and what's discarded, what's left over. I was looking at Coastal Action, which is a group, an initiative in the South Shore that collects marine gear, discarded debris, and they collected 33 tons of discarded fishing equipment last year alone, and that's just one group. So imagine if like 20 groups were out collecting all this waste. And so this is rope, lobster traps, nets, all washed up on our shores. I'm sure we've all seen it on whatever beaches we're around. And So I really noticed it during COVID because I was spending a lot more time outdoors, and I was visiting my family up in Marikamish, going beach combing and just finding so much junk and so much discarded stuff that, and I did, you don't know who to blame when you find stuff like that, because there's a big lack of accountability and a lot of equipment that's being used. Lobster traps are tagged, nets are tagged, but the bands aren't tagged, the bait bags, so there's a lot of little things that are sort of building up exponentially that my work is addressing. And then especially with ghost gear as well, I don't think people realize when stuff is lost at sea, it's still catching things and it's still killing things. Like, we're finding dead lobsters still in the traps. We're finding fish caught in nets. So I'm trying to encourage folks to not only, collect things on their own when they're beach walking or when they're walking, but I've been able to talk to people in the industry and people that work with these materials to try to address why it's happening at such a large scale and how it's impacting the environment.
And then you're also kind of, bringing these into the material of these becomes so embedded in your process, right? Like, you're weaving bands into these structures and you're incorporating these various kinds of these discarded materials, right?
Because they are beautiful materials. I'm really, I love the color, I love the texture, I love the qualities of them. So in that way, it might be a bit of a selfish reason to want to use them, but you're kind of killing a couple birds with a couple stones.
Totally.
Yeah.
Thanks, Carly. Jenny, I'd love to talk about flax production. I'd love to talk a bit about how you got into working with flax and spinning linen, and how it's connected to kind of the maybe larger issues in the textile and fashion industry, if you would be so kind.
Yeah, sure. So when I started learning how to spin linen, it was back in, 2007. It feels so long ago, when I was an undergraduate student. And so, but I think when I started really getting into flax and linen production, it was not so much about the environmental benefits of linen, but it was really about appreciating the very rich textile and material culture that we had in Nova Scotia up until the early 1920s, when we still were carrying out domestic textile production. And I think there was just a general sense of a kind of awe, or again, I guess I could say reverence, but there was a certain level of appreciation for the history of textile making here. And part of that was coming from, the suburbs of Ontario. I don't feel like I connected to the history or the culture of that place. But when I graduated from Nascad, I moved to Lunenburg, and all around me were old flax breaks in people's barns. And, people would kind of come up to me and show me their antique linens that they found in their house when they moved in. And so there was just this very alive history. So when I first started, that was really the motivation. It was about this connection to culture. But as time has gone on, and I, went on and worked in the kind of commercial fashion industry for a few years in Europe, and it's now really hard to separate the kind of ecological or environmental impact. And now I think it's really hard to see this work of local flax production as separate from, a turn towards a more sustainable or ecological solution to what's happening globally. I think there's a lot of amazing innovation and inspiration from having a global textile industry. There's incredible technology, there's new fabrics, new woven and knitwear coming out every season that is very inspirational as a designer to participate in or to look at. But I think there's also a huge environmental impact. I think the statistics now are that one garbage truck full of clothing goes to landfill every second because of just the amount of the excess that we have. in the textile and fashion industry today. So there's definitely a lot of environmental impacts in terms of the waste that's produced. It's certainly like a make waste or take waste model. You know, it's very much like a linear model of production, and socially too, what it's doing to people who are in the industry and culturally. So there are a lot of environmental impacts. And I think now, as we turn to what's possible with local textile production, it's hard to kind of separate from being aware of those kind of more harmful impacts of the industry.
Yeah, I want to bring it local for a second too. You both have practices that do seem to really focus on like sustainable models in the communities you work in, or like with a local focus, right? Whether it's combing the beaches for detritus, or whether it's working, in your case, Jenny, with farmers in your area. What does it mean to you to have this kind of local focus when it comes to sustainability?
Who should go first? Should I jump in, Carly? Sure. Well, I guess local to me is really like the antithesis to the global textile industry. So I think it gives us an opportunity to address things that we aren't maybe getting enriched by from participating in like a fast fashion system. So I think an important thing for me is relationships. I think local textile production is about relationship building. I think it's about, you know, connecting designers and weavers and knitters to farmers. So I think there's like the personal element, but I think there's also relationship building with the materials themselves, with thinking about, you know, what is the material that I'm wearing, being more cognizant of how the materials come to us and how they're made. I think another thing besides relationship is purpose and meaning. Like, I think that when we're participating, again, I hate to be like so down on the fast fashion industry, but I think when we're participating in that, we're not really contributing to local culture. And so I think there's a lot of meaning and purpose that can come about through local textile production when we kind of work together to collectively define things around our aesthetics or textures or materials or colors that we want to reflect our region. So yeah, those are some little things, some tidbits, but Carly, you can pick up on that.
Yeah, I definitely agree with everything you said. It's a lot about those relationships, those connections that you build with local communities. It sort of gets the ball rolling, because when you hear the word sustainability, it can be an incredibly intimidating idea to tackle, especially as an artist. There's so much, yeah, and I don't know if it's because I was raised Catholic or what, but I think there's like a lot of inherent guilt in when I'm making something, or when I think about how much stuff we have in this world. Like hearing that dump truck analysis, it's like it's astounding the amount of stuff that we have. And so by doing those smaller things, it can really build up, and then again create those connections. Like working with cleanup initiatives, we have so many across the province, which is really great. Scotian Shores out of Eastern Passage, again, Coastal Action. I had these really wonderful women. I reached out to them. They're in Cape Breton. They're called the Lobster Bandits. And they're these 4 older women who just go across Glace Bay collecting lobster bands. And they did a CBC article that like 20 people sent to me. And I reached out to them. And so I've formed this sort of connection with them as well. And they're bird watchers. So they're really connected to the communities, or to the environment as well. And through doing an interview with them, I had other people reach out being like, oh, I want to talk about, like, could we recreate a band? Could we recreate something? So it's connecting all of these people. And it's also, yeah, not only giving myself a sense of purpose, like you said, Jenny, it's giving other people a way of being able to be a part of this in what might seem like a small way, but I had one group donate six full garbage bags of lobster bands to me. And I think that's a pretty major thing for a single person to do. And it does make a difference. So yeah, I agree that the local aspect is very important, both for others and for myself as an artist.
Carly, I want to ask you a bit about how the importance of repair in your artwork, both as like a sustainability approach and also this kind of like metaphor you're playing with. Can you tell us a little bit about the importance of repair in your artwork?
Yeah, I think we're in a part of a really exciting movement in textiles where repair is being really celebrated and encouraged. One of my instructors in grad school, Celia Pym, she makes a lot of really beautiful mended objects where she interviews the owner of the original object and really creates this beautiful practice in that way. And I think it goes so much deeper than physically mending an object. It's interesting. I was talking to my grandmother actually this weekend about it because I was fixing a net and she was like, "Why are you fixing a net?" And I said, "Oh, it's an art project." And she said, "How is that art?" Because it was punishment for her growing up. My great grandfather was a fisherman on the Resquesh River in northern New Brunswick. And she said, "Oh, I would have to fix nets before I was allowed to go to play. Me and all my friends, that's what we had to do." And so we're in a place in our world right now where we don't have time for that. We don't have the skills for that always. We really, I think about time in a very different way and what's precious to us. And unfortunately, objects aren't as precious to us as they used to be. So we can easily discard something and just buy a new one. So I think through the act of repair, you're becoming more connected to the object. You're becoming more connected to the physical, the tactility of it. You know, there's something just about rubbing a piece of string in your fingers. It connects you to the material in a way that I think, yeah, we really need to be spending more time in doing. And for me, again, during COVID, and as for a lot of people, it was a really rough time. I think people were really struggling in a lot of different ways. I was trying to find this sense of purpose, this sense of I need to be doing something. And so I was fixing everything. I was fixing anything I'd get my hands on. And although I wasn't necessarily fixing things to be functional, again, in its original state, I was fixing it for myself and having the time to reflect and having a time to just slow down and be more connected to that process.
I love that. And yeah, we've talked a lot about connection, both with the material and with community. I'd love to pose a question to both of you about what does this sustainable approach to making art mean for you? Like, what is it about the sustainable way of making and way of using materials that is so important and impactful for you? Maybe Carly, we'll start with you and then go to Jen.
Sure. Yeah, I was thinking about this question a lot. And the first thing I think of is when we hear the 3 R's, reduce, reuse, recycle, I don't think we realize there are 3 more R's that we can really consider when we're looking at an object. There's refuse, so just not using the material or not using the object at all. There's reconfigure or reimagine, where you're giving an object a new life or a new sense of purpose that isn't necessarily the original one, which is the one that I think, connected to a lot in my practice. And then there is repair as well. So there are 6 R's. And I think in my practice specifically, I like to reconfigure or reimagine objects being used in other locations, which I guess it kind of blurs the line between recycle as well, because you could recycle an object in that way too. But I think if people were to see a material and think of it in those ways, again, because we have so much stuff, I think we really need to start thinking about what we're putting out into the world. Is this what is needed right now? Is this, what is the longevity of it? What is the purpose of it? I think as craft people, we naturally tend to do that. Also, stuff is really expensive right now, especially. And I think in working in a sustainable way, it's more financially feasible in a lot of ways. It might not be in the moment that you're making it, but long term, I think it makes a financial sense to work in that way as well.
Absolutely. Jenny, what about you? How has why was a sustainable approach to art making so important to you? And were there things that changed in your practice as you developed more sustainable ways of working?
Yeah, thanks, Molly. That's a great question. I think for me, um, as conversations around sustainability have become more mainstream, I think that has given me a great sense of freedom, much more of a sense of freedom in my art practice. So I think what's changed for me is that these considerations I have around like environmental impact can be more of a conversation with the viewer as opposed to just something I'm focusing on myself. I think a lot of people want to engage in questions around ecological impact and textiles. So I think it's allowed my practice to broaden quite a bit. And if it is a more kind of fine art textile piece that I'm working on, I still think what's really core to that work is a kind of environmentally based research question. So one recent project I worked on with a collaborator in Scotland, the kind of question we were posing to ourselves was, what would it be like to wear the woodlands? And then that really, the project had to encompass more than that, but it still became a very like central theme that we could have a conversation around. And then hopefully when it was put out there that, other people could engage in that that question as well. But I think, again, now that it's more mainstream, I think it's allowed me to do projects like the Flaxmobile and to launch a project like that, and for there to be the incredible response that there was, because I think people are now hungry to tackle these questions. And it's such a big question that I don't think we can tackle it individually without getting quite overwhelmed. So I think it's definitely opened the door in my creative practice to have a lot more kind of community-based work, have a lot more people involved in asking and collectively answering these questions. So I think that's been a really welcome change.
Yeah, I love that there's sort of all these people that come together in both of your practices, from people donating and finding all of these bands for Carley, or Jen, like all of the moving parts and people in your work. I'd love if you could talk a bit more about the Flaxmobile and any other kind of big projects that have come out of your art practice.
Yeah, sure. And I wonder if I should maybe share a screen just to show a few visuals. Should we see
Sure.
it? Okay, so yeah, this is just the Wearing the Woodlands series of kind of development. But I'm just gonna jump to the Flaxmobile project. So this is a project that was launched in April of 2022. And it was put out through social media, and about 15 farmers replied that they were interested. And so this project was really a way to connect makers, or like the textile sector, with the agricultural sector. So one challenge, I know there's a lot of amazing textile students in the crowd. So one thing I think that we can all relate to is the challenge of sourcing materials locally. So as a weaver, a lot of our yarns have to be shipped in from elsewhere, other provinces, or outside of Canada mostly. And we're now paying a lot of money just even on shipping fees, in addition to the cost of the yarn itself. And so where a lot of students or members of the community are asking questions like, how do we start sourcing textile materials locally? The Flaxmobile project was really an attempt to start building these bridges across agriculture and textiles. So throughout the growing season last year, I worked with 15 farms to grow flax, and it was quite geographically distributed across Nova Scotia. So from Caledonia near Keji-Makujik National Park up to Cape Breton. And there was a real Flaxmobile van that went around and visited the farms. And we went through all the stages of growing, from planting to the processing, which you can see in the picture in the bottom left. So all the farmers, I think it was unique for the farmers too, because they will, typically in this sort of a scenario, they might just send their retted flax off to be processed elsewhere. But in this case, we really went through to see the end product, to see the cleaned linen fibers, which you can see in the center image there, so that they are really learning the skill of how to grow flax for linen, so that they can kind of continue that year after year now, and we can start to develop an industry here. And I'll just show you, this is some of the cleaned linen fibers that resulted. So this was 10 of the farms shown here, and you can see how different the colors of the flax is depending on the soil quality and the environmental conditions. So this project really is about connecting to place and, celebrating these kind of subtle differences and variances of kind of soil and place. So I'll stop sharing.
Thanks, Jen. That's so interesting to see. I love how they look like little hairdos or something, those bundles of flax. They're so charming.
Yeah, very hair-like.
Yeah, right. I want to talk a bit about techniques and tools. And Jen, you brought this up, but I think I want to start with Carley, and then we'll come back to you if that's okay. I'd love to talk about historic tools and techniques that you both bring into your artwork and into these, the production of these materials, what it means to you to bring these historic ways of making into your contemporary art practices. Carley, could you get us started?
Sure. I have a few images of my tools. Now I can share my screen too. I might also have to be enabled, but or made a host. But yeah, I started actually making my own tools out of necessity when I was in grad school. Sorry, I'm not on my own computer, and I'm on a Mac, and all the buttons are very different. But yeah, basically I did out of necessity because I couldn't afford a lot of the materials I wanted to use. Okay. It's not letting me share, but I don't need them. So I wasn't able to afford all of these. My instructors just kept wanting me to work really big and make these really massive pieces. And I was living in London. Everything was so expensive, and so I wanted to use rope and these really, really thick cordages and yarns. And then somebody was like, "Oh, well, why don't you just commission somebody to make them for you?" I was like, "That's even more expensive. I don't know why you would even suggest that." So I think just being a very naturally curious person, I started researching the equipment to see if I could buy the equipment. Also everything was just so flipping expensive. So I realized I could make my own. I could make my own tools. I will say I'm not a spinner. I'm terrible at spinning. I'm really trying really hard, but I was really interested in twisting and doing cordage in that way. So I started making my own rope machines. And through that, I was really reading a lot about the history of rope making in Nova Scotia. Dartmouth was a big part of its economy, was founded on rope production in the late 1800s. By the Stairs family. So, and there's actually a street called Rope Walk Lane in Dartmouth, if you've seen it. So I was kind of really connecting to that history that I never really considered. And then also through the act of making my own tools, again, I was connecting with material in a much deeper level, because I was with it from the very beginning. I was producing material, I was producing, yarns and objects and things to then create other objects out of these materials. But I really fell in love with that process and the tools themselves. So in my final exhibition, I actually just showed all of my tools, because I felt like they were the most important part of my practice at the time. And I was reinventing it to make them make more sense for me. For example, I have really tiny hands, so a lot of the equipment and tools I wanted to use were made for men or people with much larger hands. So I was making them specific for myself, and to also allow the public to be able to use them too. And I take them around, I do rope making workshops and braiding workshops with the devices I've created to connect people with the history of it, but also seeing them being used in contemporary practices. Oh, and yeah, thanks. The link's in the chat there with some of the images of the tools.
Yeah, I tried to find one that I thought was fitting with what you were saying. Sorry about the technical issue there, Carly, but thank you.
No worries. It's my fault.
Jenny, we've touched a bit on like flax production for you and the kind of historic work there, but is there anything else you'd like to add about traditional tools or traditional ways of making that you're bringing into your practice, and why?
Yeah, sure. So I still use an antique spinning wheel regularly in kind of preparation for my weaving work, and to transform the kind of cleaned linen fibers into thread. And I often ask myself this question, like, why am I hand spinning? Because it's a bit embarrassing to acknowledge that it's not financially feasible to do. And I think there's a certain level of like, wanting to hide that aspect of my practice, but it's still, it's incredibly significant. And I think one of the reasons is quality. Like since I started weaving with linen in 2005, the quality of linen yarn has gone down significantly. And that was something that, again, professors at Nascad, Sandra Brownlee, really opened my eyes to, was being attentive to the quality of the threads that you're using. And, you could beat linen so hard when I was first weaving with it, and now it's so easy to snap. And just the way global linen spinning and manufacturing has evolved, the quality has gone down a lot in the last 2 decades. So certainly I think I hold on to hand spinning for quality of the thread, but I think it's something a lot more elemental for me. It's really like the moment. Hand spinning is the moment when you kind of transition from a plant to a textile. And so it feels a lot more about a way of accessing the material, again, in a really deep way. That's like kind of my theme, I guess, but it's more elemental, it's tactile, it allows much more control of the quality. And I think there's also a very meditative aspect for me about it, a very like quiet space where I can sit in that kind of reverence for the materials that are being used. And I think without that, in a way, I think reciprocity is a really important part of sustainability. And so I think being able to kind of sit in those moments with your materials is really part of a way of honoring them. So yeah.
That's lovely. Thank you, Jenny. I'd like to maybe go with one final question, and I think we'll have time to transition into questions from the audience. But I'd like to ask you both about your role as teachers and how you talk to your students about sustainability as artists. Maybe Jenny, will start with you and then finish off with Carly.
Yeah, I think for me, the most important thing is just to listen, because I think students are already really engaged with questions around sustainability. I think they feel a great sense of responsibility. So I think an important aspect is kind of listening to their, how they want to approach something, to not be dogmatic, but to kind of respond to their motivation. So, you know, within the textiles department, sometimes that's about having courses that allow them to address that. You know, often, for example, our natural dye class fills up in like 24 hours because it's so, you know, people have such an interest in it. So it could be about having more courses that students can access. But also, I do like to engage students in kind of collaborative or collective engagement with these questions, because I think it is important that we have more practice kind of getting out of this like individual art star sort of approach to art making, and I think practice collaboration more. And I think topics like sustainability are a really great way to invite more collective thinking around that.
And I think the same thing could be true of sustainability and like ecological approaches, right? That individuals alone aren't going to solve these larger ecological issues, but if we more collaboration and more kind of community work around them is certainly a great way to help resolve some of those problems, I think.
Mhm.
Thanks, Jenny. Carly, do you want to finish us off with a little bit about how you talk to your students about sustainability as artists?
Yeah, I think I might tackle it in a bit of approach in that it makes sense it makes sense financially, just in terms of using found material and reclaimed objects. A class I teach, off-loom structures, that was created by my mentor Toshiko McAdam. It's like the first month or so, we focus on making cordage, twisted ropes, braids, so making materials. But I always encourage I don't want students to be spending a lot of money, and I know I think it was a lot different when we were students, but we had the love dumpster in the student lounge. That was just a big box filled with like binders, papers, old clothes. And it was such a fun space because you would go around and see people's projects, and little bits of the same material would be across the, like you would see it in ceramics or jewelry, or it could be a fabric or something. And I think by placing that limitation, sometimes that encourages more growth. I'm the type of artist that if I have too many choices, I get like, I freeze. Like I can't look at a blank piece of paper. I have no idea what to do. So if I limit myself personally with, I can only use found objects. I can only use marine debris. I can only use, I can only use what I forage in my backyard. I think that also is a way to encourage students to really be more exploratory and again, focus a little bit deeper on the act of making and less on the preciousness of materials, because that can also be quite overwhelming. I don't know how jewelry artists do it. I would be so overwhelmed by not being able to kind of just really play and be a bit more messy with the materials. So I always love when I have jewelry students in the class too, because it's a very helpful mindset to have to kind of help narrow things down. So I think that, and students naturally do that. I think, everyone wants to, use what's around locally. You want to save money. You don't want to ship things in, especially during COVID. I think that really amps a lot of that thought up, or that process of making. Was much more encouraged. And one of the most exciting things I noticed when I taught off-loom structures online, I remember my first time I had a student in Pakistan, I had several in China, I had a student in the UK. So they were all over the world, and they were using materials I had never even heard of before. Like I saw plant fiber or banana fibers being spun into cordage. There was a tree, this Chinese shrub that I had never seen, that made the most beautiful cordage I had ever seen. But it was all in your backyard because we weren't allowed to go anywhere. And that really, I think, it helped a lot of students. It's not the case for everybody, obviously, but I think knowing what materials you want to use and the best way to use them in a way that makes sense sustainably is what I really want to encourage.
Thanks, Carly. I've posted links to both Carly and Jen's websites and more about their work as artists and teachers in the chat if anybody would like to see more. I recommend you do. And now we're going to open it up to questions from all of you. So if you would like to bring a question up either on video or in the chat, now is the time.
Hi, I have a question. This might be a bit broad, but what are some like common misconceptions about having a sustainable practice do you think we should be thinking about?
That's a great question, Taya. Do you mean misperceptions like from the general public or from fellow artists?
I guess anyone, like maybe in like the kind of mainstream dialogue about it, or I don't know if I like that.
Yeah, I think one common misperception is that like sustainable, I guess I'm thinking about your work in like textiles and fashion. And I think one common misperception is that sustainable work cannot be like beautiful work or aesthetically pleasing, that you have to trade aesthetics for sustainability. And I think that's something that as you know, I see the amazing work that students at Nascad are doing, and I think that's something that can really be challenged. And I think it's actually like imperative that that's challenged in order for the general public to kind of come on board with kind of putting money behind sustainable textiles or fashion products. I think sometimes I see that there's still a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of educating consumers and educating the general public about how the work is sustainable. So I think educational marketing, for lack of a better word, is something that's still like we would still need to be attentive to and to put effort into when going to kind of sell or market products. Those are two that kind of come to mind immediately. Carly, do any others come to mind for you?
Yeah, I agree. This kind of greenwashing effect that tends to happen, you know, especially when industries come in and say like, oh, we're replacing all of our straws with paper straws. But in the big picture, is that really what needs to be addressed in terms of a sustainable practice? Oh, my mind drifted off for a second. Yeah, and I think sustainable also means longevity. If something is physically sustainable, mentally sustainable, if it's not a practice that can be done long term, if it's something that, you know, is very costly, if it's something that requires a lot of physical manual labor, long term, does it make sense feasibly to continue it? Or it could be a small thing that might not be hugely sustainable, but it's able to be done long term. So in the bigger picture, it could in that way be much more sustainable, if that makes sense.
We have a quick question in the chat from, speaking of bringing it back to jewelers, Carly. Rebecca Hannon is asking us about where we can buy apparel made with local fiber such as flax. Jennifer, do you have any like places you recommend people can purchase anything made from the Flaxmobile or other flax projects?
It might be another year or two, Rebecca, before we have things that are able to be purchased. Right now, things are happening on a pretty small scale. There's like, we have some great Nascad alumni who are starting to create kind of hand woven garments, like hand woven and hand sewn garments that are available locally, but it's not with local fibers. So I think let's stay in touch. I think it's just something that it may be another year or two before that really gets off the ground. Taproot is a really great place to stay in touch with. They're an organic farm in the valley, and they do all the processing for the flax in the province. And so you can keep in touch with them and check out their kind of Instagram and their website. But before we have kind of local clothing made from local materials, like from the ground up, it's still going to be a year or so, I would say.
Okay, we've got Anita has a hand up in the audience. Anita, you've got a question?
Thanks. Yeah. I just wanted to hear your thoughts about balancing art and activism. And I find in my own practice, sometimes I get kind of caught up in thinking like, should I just be actually like on the ground, like working on policies with organizations? And so, I kind of I experience a lot of self-doubt with that. And thinking like, how is my art going to be pushing for that as well? So I wanted to hear your thoughts about that and where you sit between art and activism and how you engage with both.
Yeah, that's a great question, Anita. Carly, are you okay if I jump in?
Yeah, go for it.
For me, the way I've structured it is I kind of am taking like a 4-pronged approach, and the activism component for me is one of those prongs. And I guess for me, I think of it almost as like consumer education and outreach. That's how I'm framing it, as opposed to activism. I guess that's just language I feel more comfortable with. But there's so much. I think the reason for me it's important to have a 4-pronged approach is that there's so much work that needs to be done. And if I was solely focused on the activism or the like education outreach, that kind of like public facing side, I think the larger goal of reorienting a local fiber system, at least, like Anita, I guess I'm not so sure about your goal, but for me, that there's so much work that needs to be done that the kind of educational piece is just one piece. And, developing work, developing local apparel made from local fibers is another prong, right? And so without being able to have materials available, we wouldn't really be able to reorient consumer behavior. So, and I know that those are kind of my words, not yours, but so I think it's really important to see it as an aspect of your overall approach to kind of reaching your goal. That's how I'm approaching it. Yeah, Carly, again, you can step in.
Yeah, I think with my work being pretty gallery based, I also really struggle with that and the purpose of it. But through the conversations that you have through making the work, like using a material that people will want to ask questions about or feel connected to in some sort of personal way, I've found like I'm making a difference through doing that. And by connecting people, saying like, oh, I found all this debris, where can I bring it? And then I'll bring it to a recycling depot, or I'll suggest a recycling depot. So it's all those kind of smaller things that are being built up through just the exposure of the original idea or concept in the work. So it might not seem like it's doing a huge amount in the moment, but I think, exponentially it does make a difference, and through purely having the conversations or those connections, at least for me.
Thank you both so much.
Thanks, Anita. Okay, I feel like Dorothy's question might have been answered in the chat, so I'm going to go to Pamela Stone's question, which is, how do you balance sustainable/slow practice with affordable pricing? Anybody have thoughts on that? Jenny and Carly?
This is the most stressful question I am asking myself, Pamela. I think that right now I don't want to go on a big spiel, but we're operating in a kind of capitalist system. And that system is, you know, the global textile and fashion industry emerged out of that, and it's a broken system. Like, it's not sustainable. We're creating tons of waste. There are some quite devastating social conditions in which those materials are being produced. So I think it's a real challenge. And I think for me, the answer is that we almost need to reimagine the economic model that we're working within. I think that's the only way we can actually make it affordable, is to kind of step out of a capitalist structure. So I know that's not like maybe a lucrative answer, Pam, but I'm really curious about about different economic models, about bioregional economics, about gift economies, about indigenomics, about donut economics. Like, I think finding out ways that we can participate and create and contribute, but doing it in a way that's not undercutting the value of what we're doing. So I feel like that's not an answer and an answer at the same time. But I just want to say I empathize with the challenge of that question. And I think my approach, at least in the Flaxmobile project, is that it's about exchange of like, right now, no money is being exchanged. It's like, I'm going to share this skill with you, and you're going to share the flax, and I'm then going to make something from the flax and give you know, linen work shirts back to the farmers. So it's really almost more of like a gift economy than a financial transaction. But I know that is a really challenging question that we have to answer as craftspeople.
Carley, do you have any final thoughts on that question from
I
Pam?
agree. It's a huge topic that I think we could have a whole talk just on that. I think the financial feasibility of a lot of sustainable practices. And then, knowing Pam's work, she's an amazing quilter, by the way. I think because you always need to, you know, consider the time that it takes to create something. And, you know, if it's a practice like where you're dyeing all of your own fabrics, all of your own yarns, you know, the general public doesn't see that and doesn't necessarily always understand the amount of time that goes into the object that's being created or made. So I think it also depends on where you're selling it and who you're selling it to. And unfortunately, right now, just in terms of the education of what sustainability means. So I think it's a slow process, but I definitely don't think anyone should ever undersell their work. You always need to stand firm in what you believe your work costs, and that also includes the time behind it.
Well, it's wonderful, guys. Thank you. I think that's all the time we have for questions. Thank you, Carley and Jenny, so much. It was so wonderful to chat with you about your projects and about your practices. And for everybody who's joined us, there's links in our chat to see more of both Jenny and Carley's work.